Denver voters will decide on a variety of issues, ranging from bonds for city projects to enforcing an outdoor camping ban and much more. Also, 4 new Denver Public School Board directors will be chosen. We'll look at the issues and candidates for the November 2nd coordinated election on this edition of Denver Decides. We'll start with the ballot issues. There are several statewide and citywide questions on the ballot. Some of these issues are citizen-initiated measures, meaning citizens gathered enough signatures on a petition, which were then certified by the Secretary of State and placed on the ballot. The other issues were referred to voters by legislators. With the help of the Colorado Blue Book and Denver's Municipal Ballot Information Booklet and the League of Women Voters, we'll show you some pros and cons to consider. You can download an interactive sample ballot at denvervotes.org to follow along. You'll find it by clicking the November 2021 Coordinated Election link. Going in ballot order, we'll start with the statewide issues. First among these is Amendment 78, Legislative Authority for Spending State Money. This is a citizen-initiated proposal and requires 55% of the vote to pass. This proposal deals with money the state sometimes receives that is not part of its current budget process. This money could include emergency relief funds, grants, or other money from the federal government. This money, which is received for a particular purpose, is known as custodial money. Amendment 78 proposes amending the Colorado Constitution and the Colorado statute to prohibit state agencies from spending this custodial money without direct allocation by the state legislature. It would require that custodial money be deposited into a newly created fund and that interest earned on money in the fund be transferred to the state's general fund. And it would require that the state legislature allocate any spending from the new fund each year following a public hearing. Here are the pros and cons for Amendment 78.
Those in favor of Amendment 78 say the measure increases transparency and accountability in state government. The governor, the attorney general, and unelected administrators in state agencies currently spend large amounts of custodial money, often without public input or accessible public records. By requiring that all state spending be directly allocated by the state legislature, the measure allows for public participation and provides transparency in how funds are spent.
Those opposed say Amendment 78 adds unnecessary and expensive bureaucracy and risks significant unintended consequences. A longer allocation process could delay or interrupt state services, including emergency responses to public health or wildfire disasters. Further, making grant funding subject to additional steps could jeopardize Colorado's competitiveness for grant awards, resulting in the state receiving less money. Finally, the measure shifts decision-making from program experts and independent commissions to a political process in the state legislature.
Next up, Proposition 119. This is a citizen-initiated proposal and would pass with a simple majority. Proposition 119 proposes amending the Colorado statutes to raise the state marijuana tax to create the Colorado Learning Enrichment and Academic Progress Program to help certain Colorado youth access and pay for out-of-school learning opportunities like tutoring. It would pay for the program by raising retail marijuana taxes and using other existing state funds. The state marijuana tax would increase by 5% by 2024, which would mean an annual increase of over $137 million. Here are the pros and cons for Proposition 119.
Those in favor of Proposition 119 say it increases the sales tax on retail marijuana to fund financial aid for tutoring and other out-of-school learning opportunities for Colorado students. Even before the pandemic, tutoring and out-of-school instructional support were badly needed by the significant number of students who are not proficient in reading, writing, or math. School closures caused by COVID-19 have urgently increased the need for outside instructional support, especially among low-income students who cannot afford the cost of tutoring or enrichment services. Proponents also say Proposition 119 supports the academic and developmental needs of all students, and low-income students will be prioritized for financial aid. The measure empowers an independent, bipartisan board to certify that tutoring and enrichment providers are qualified and accountable. Once financial aid is awarded, families and students will have the choice about which certified tutors or other instructional providers best meet the specific needs of their student.
Those opposed to Proposition 119 say it allows public money to be directed to private, out-of-school service providers instead of invested directly in public schools. Public dollars set aside for education are needed to support the public education system. If voters want to increase retail marijuana taxes for education, the revenue would be better used to expand the capacity of public schools in every community, keeping the money under local control and allowing school districts to reinstate programs they have had to cut, and to provide additional learning and enrichment opportunities for children. Opponents also say increasing the sales tax on marijuana will further increase the gap in prices between legal marijuana and black market marijuana, pushing more individuals into the black market and hurting legitimate retail marijuana businesses. Additionally, the retail sales tax on marijuana already places a greater financial burden on low-income individuals. Increasing the tax rate will only make this worse.
Next up is Proposition 120, Property Tax Assessment Rate Reduction. It is a citizen-initiated proposal and would pass with a simple majority. Proposition 120 proposes amending the Colorado statutes to lower the property tax assessment rates for multifamily housing and lodging properties and allow the state to retain money above constitutional spending limits if it is used to fund existing property tax exemptions. It's important to note that the description of the measure here and in the Colorado Voter Information Guide differs from the language in the ballot question because a law that changed the effect of the measure was passed by the state legislature after the ballot question was written. Now here are the pros and cons for Proposition 120.
Those in favor of Proposition 120 say the measure provides targeted tax relief for important sectors of Colorado's economy. Reducing property taxes for most multifamily properties may ease pressure on rents and encourage investment to address Colorado's housing shortage. In addition, lodging owners may hire and retain more employees and potentially reduce lodging rates, attracting additional visitors.
Opponents to Proposition 120 say permanently reducing property tax revenue to local governments may result in cuts to important government services. Proposition 120 will pose challenges for special districts, cities, or counties that rely on property tax revenue from multifamily homes or lodging properties to maintain services such as water, transportation, education, and emergency services. In particular, critical fire protection needs are increasing rapidly, and not all areas of the state are able to generate the funding needed to support these local services.
Those are the statewide issues you'll be voting on this fall. Again, you can get more information about these ballot measures. All Denver households with registered voters should have gotten a Colorado Blue Book mailed by the Secretary of State's office. In addition, you can get information on these issues from the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Go to lwvcolorado.org. We'll get to the local issues when we return. Now, on to the city issues. For these issues, you can get information about them from your Denver Municipal Ballot Information Booklet. All Denver households with registered voters will get a copy by mail. You can go to denvervotes.org to download a copy if you haven't received it. You can also get information on these issues from the League of Women Voters of Denver at lwvdenver.org. There are 5 Denver bond issues on the ballot. Referred questions 2A through 2E. These were referred to voters by Denver City Council. The first of the city issues on the ballot is referred question 2A. It asks if the city debt should be increased by $104 million for bonds to fund Denver facilities improvements. This would include the following: critical infrastructure and repairs to Denver Botanic Gardens, Bonfils Theater Complex, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and Denver Zoo. preservation and restoration of the Mae Bonfils Stanton Theater at the historic Loretto Heights campus for use as a performing and cultural arts venue, renovation of an existing city-owned facility into a youth empowerment center, construction of 2 new libraries, and upgrading existing libraries to include children's learning areas, community spaces, and technology labs, and accessibility improvements to Denver facilities for people with disabilities. Here are the pros and cons for 2A.
Those in favor say Denver referred questions 2A through 2E will deliver infrastructure improvements that power our economic recovery and help the people who need it the most. Specifically, Measure 2A will construct libraries in Globeville and Westwood, 2 historically underserved communities, and expand the Hampton Branch Library, which serves immigrant communities in Southeast Denver. Upgrade city buildings to meet accessibility standards prescribed in the Americans with Disabilities Act. Improve the Youth Empowerment Center building to provide more space and resources for youths and families in Denver, ranging from vocational and educational support, entrepreneurial training, and recreation activities. Fund improvements at cultural facilities and museums to enhance safety and accessibility for guests. Jumpstart the redevelopment of the Loretto Heights campus, and fund renovations to the Buell Theater at the Denver Performing Arts Complex. Proponents say Measures 2A through 2E are a result of input from residents across Denver reflecting the need to address critical issues, create a more equitable city, and jumpstart the economy, all without raising taxes.
Those opposed to referred question 2A say sticker shock is coming our way in 2022 for the price of housing. Voting yes on 2A will further increase that cost. Home sales over the last 24 months reached record levels, and those jaw-dropping valuations drive up the property taxes. In 2017, taxpayers approved Elevate Denver, a nearly $1 billion proposal to pay for all the projects listed in 2A. Additionally, voters were swayed to eliminate the Gallagher Amendment, which limited residential property tax assessments. It is likely that many voters didn't understand just how much this will increase property taxes, but that time is coming. Those factors mean you will now see the price jump on your property tax bill or mortgage escrow if you own property. If you're renting, you can likely expect a dramatic jump in your rent or lease price. Lower-income workers are being forced to move out of Denver due to high prices, and then ironically having to travel longer distances to work in Denver. Continually driving up the cost of living in Denver is a key factor in gentrification.
Next up is referred question 2B. This asks voters if the city should increase debt by $38 million with the funds used for repairs and improvements to the Denver housing and sheltering system. This may include establishing and/or improving shelters and facilities to provide services to people experiencing homelessness by purchasing buildings, converting buildings, and/or constructing facilities. Here are the pros and cons for question 2B.
Proponents say referred question 2B will help address the homelessness crisis in Denver. It will fund the purchase of the 48th Avenue shelter, which will keep the space operational as a 24/7 shelter. Dedicate funds for the purchase, conversion, or construction of up to 300 motel rooms in Denver to function as shelters. And fund needed improvements to shelters that are currently operational, which will address gaps in the current shelter system during emergency conditions.
Opponents of 2B say we have already put forth huge sums of money for this issue without improvement. Homelessness and homeless camps are worse than they have ever been, in spite of the campaign to end homelessness in Denver more than a decade or two ago. That campaign backfired by more homeless people moving to Denver to take advantage of the programs here. A recent report from a public policy group here in Denver reports that between $42,000 to $104,000 is spent each year per person experiencing homelessness.
Next up, referred question 2C asks if the city debt should be increased $63 million to fund repairs and improvements to the Denver transportation and mobility system. This could include expanding Denver's sidewalk network by filling sidewalk coverage gaps, improving bicycle safety and mobility by renovating existing bike lanes and creating new protected bike lanes and neighborhood bikeway lanes, improving pedestrian and bicycle safety by installing enhanced crosswalks, adding medians, improving and installing new traffic signals, and other mobility infrastructure improvements. Reconstructing sections of the Morrison Road corridor to create a cultural and arts district, and constructing a segment of the urban trail and pedestrian walkway in downtown Denver.
Those in favor of 2C say it will address improvements to the city's transportation and mobility network to help reach the objectives of Vision Zero. Measure 2C will build out Denver's bicycle infrastructure in Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, South, and Central Denver neighborhoods to provide a more comfortable and safe experience for cyclists. Much of this new construction is in traditionally underserved neighborhoods. It will address sidewalk construction, pedestrian and transportation safety throughout the city. Denver currently has 300 miles of sidewalk gaps that 2C will address across the city with an emphasis on underserved neighborhoods. Fund the reconstruction of Morrison Road and multimodal improvements along Peoria. This will improve access to commercial and residential spaces for residents and workers, which will in turn increase economic output in these communities. Spur the development of the 5280 Urban Trail downtown, the heart of Denver. The trail will create a space for small businesses and local artists to help link Denver's urban life with its outdoor culture.
Opponents say the main objection to this issue is that the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is spending money to provide services as they wish them to be, not as they are needed. A good example of this is the proliferation of bike lanes where people do not bicycle. This is best seen in the bike lanes that are along South Broadway. A recent study shows that 0.02% of the traveling public uses the lanes, while the remaining users of the corridor, that is 99.98%, are privately owned vehicles, RTD riders, and commercial vehicles. They say the repair and expansion of Denver's sidewalks has been a complete failure and is already years and years behind schedule. This money, $63 million, will be further tax dollars down the drain. Until Denver gets the homeless issue under control, spending further tax dollars for any downtown venue will be money wasted.
Next up, referred question 2D asks if the city should increase its debt by $54 million for repairs and improvements to the Denver Parks and Recreation System. This could include development and construction of 2 new parks in Northeast Denver and South Denver, improvements to other parks, including replacing playground and recreation equipment, replacing and restoring athletic fields and courts, and critical infrastructure improvements, including renovating and building restrooms and rebuilding the swimming pool at Mestizo Curtis Park. Now here are the pros and cons of question 2D.
Those in favor of 2D say this proposal will create new parks in underserved communities, replace and add new amenities to existing parks, and build the infrastructure needed to care for our open space going forward. Funds from Measure 2D will rebuild the Mestizo Curtis Pool and the Sloan's Lake Boathouse, add courts and new public restrooms, and construct accessible playgrounds for children with disabilities at other parks.
Those opposed remind voters that in 2017, Elevate Denver was approved by Denver voters, which was intended, in part, to revitalize our parks, playgrounds, and recreation centers. Elevate Denver's cost was close to $1 billion. The city's 2020 report indicates that 40% of the money still hasn't been spent. They say over a third of $1 billion is still sitting unspent, and therefore is a good reason to vote no.
Question 2E asks if the debt be increased by $190 million to be used for repairs and improvements to the National Western Campus facility system. This may include construction of a multi-use arena for concerts, local and high school sporting events, rodeos, and other entertainment events at the National Western Campus, and renovation and preservation of an historic building at the National Western Campus to create a public market. Now here's the pros and cons of 2E.
Those in favor say Measure 2E will fund Phase 3 of development at the National Western Campus, continuing the work needed to complete the National Western Campus Master Plan. Measure 2E will transform the historic 1909 building into a public market, which was envisioned in the NWC Master Plan. The renovation will protect this historic landmark while providing the Globeville and Elyria Swansea communities a USDA-recognized food desert with fresh, healthy, and local foods that will help satisfy the everyday shopping needs of residents. The space will provide opportunities for local business owners, chefs, entrepreneurs, and community members with new economic opportunities while providing year-round living wage jobs. And construct a year-round 10,000-seat National Western Center arena to replace the aging and outdated Denver Coliseum.
Those opposed to 2E say the National Western Bond burdens taxpayers with increased property taxes for a $190 million bond to fund a financially unsound and socially unjust development plan for a rodeo arena and public market. At a time when Denver needs investment in housing, infrastructure, and community businesses, we cannot afford to divert recovery funds to an arena and market. Bonds can be funded in numerous ways, such as tourism taxes, but the city is rushing through a bond that forces taxpayers to shoulder the costs. The city has until 2027 to secure funding for National Western, and there is no pressing need to secure the bond funds this year. Additionally, the city already issued a bond in 2015 for infrastructure improvements, yet nearly 70% of those funds remain unspent. The development plans for National Western were also found to be economically and financially unsound. The feasibility study commissioned by the City of Denver states that the public market would likely fail because these neighborhoods alone don't have the population density and resulting purchasing power to support a public market.
Next up is referred question 2F. This one asks if the city should repeal an ordinance passed by City Council in 2020. That ordinance regulates residential care facilities, such as those caring for elderly residents and people experiencing homelessness, by size rather than use. The ordinance allows community corrections facilities to locate in commercial and mixed-use zoning districts and removes the buffer from residential zones and schools for such facilities. The ordinance increases the number of unrelated adults who can live together in a household from 2 to 5, with up to 1 licensed car per adult plus 1 additional vehicle per household. The repeal of this measure will lead to a reduction in available property for homeless shelters and community corrections facilities. Now here are the pros and cons of 2F.
Those in favor of 2F say Denver residents should have a direct say in what happens in their backyards, blocks, and neighborhoods. Safe and Sound Denver, a group in favor of 2F, is a grassroots effort of Denver residents who advocate for the safety and well-being of our neighborhoods. These proponents want to maintain the stability of our communities with sound policy that supports the long-term growth of Denver. Proponents want to repeal the Group Living Zoning Code Amendment, which, they say, uses our neighborhoods as a major, unproven experiment that benefits profiteers. They feel instead that citizens should have a voice and a choice about housing in our neighborhoods. They contend that City Council and the mayor didn't listen, and now it's the citizens' turn.
Those opposed to question 2F say that repealing the zoning change would take away the option for working families, like teachers, nurses, and grocery store clerks, to share housing costs with friends, coworkers, or roommates. They say baseless fear-mongering won't change facts. The zoning change does not allow any community corrections serving those coming from prison in single-family areas, and it limits the number of residential care facilities that can operate in any one area and requires them to be spaced apart. If 2F passes, it threatens to take away capacity and the ability to improve services to existing homeless shelters in the city, and to make it more expensive and difficult to serve people experiencing homelessness. Denver needs more options, not fewer, when it comes to providing affordable housing. By voting no on 2F, we can protect Coloradans affected by the fallout from the pandemic or other circumstances out of their control.
Now on to 2G, which asks if the city charter should be amended to allow the Citizen Oversight Board to appoint the independent monitor with consent of City Council, providing the office of the monitor with independent legal counsel, and establishing the employment status of its employees.
Those in favor of 2G say the measure changes Denver's charter to increase the effectiveness of the Office of the Independent Monitor. The office provides independent oversight of investigations into wrongdoing by uniformed officers and deputies. They say the measure allows the independent monitor to seek independent legal advice when needed to fulfill their duties as a watchdog over other City of Denver safety agencies. It gives the Citizen Oversight Board, COB, responsibility for appointing the monitor with confirmation by City Council to ensure true independence from the agencies they monitor. And employees under the monitor will be part of the career service to ensure that they are protected from retaliation for doing their job as watchdogs, with no changes to salaries or benefits.
No opposing comments were filed by the deadline.
Next up is Referred Question 2H, which asks voters if the city charter should be amended to move the general election for the City and County of Denver from the first Tuesday in May of odd-numbered years to the first Tuesday in April of those odd-numbered years. This would bring the City and County of Denver into compliance with federal and state laws for mailing June runoff election ballots to military and overseas citizens 45 days before Election Day.
Those in favor of Referred Question 2H say Denver's charter requires that elected officials be elected by a majority of the votes cast. This amendment is the only alternative that preserves the majority vote. Denver's runoff system produces a majority winner every time, something no other system can guarantee. A principal advantage of runoff elections is that they provide a more focused, one-on-one race after an initial election with a crowded field of candidates. An alternative suggestion to bring the city in compliance with federal laws was ranked choice voting, in which voters can rank candidates in order of preference. For several reasons, the council chose to refer the simpler measure of putting sufficient time between the general and runoff elections.
Opponents say extending the runoff election for an extra month is the wrong move for civility in politics. Our typical one-month runoff is an opportunity for special interest money to buy off our elected officials. They say it is shameful that the Denver City Council would not even consider adopting ranked choice voting and do away with the runoff election and save taxpayers close to $1 million. Broomfield's City Council made the right choice, Denver's City Council not so much.
Initiated Ordinance 300 asks if Denver should increase retail marijuana sales tax by 1.5%, which would add $7 million annually to be used to fund pandemic research for advanced technologies to protect the public from the spread of pandemic pathogens, and for pandemic preparedness and recovery. The funds would be dedicated entirely to the University of Colorado Denver City Center. 75% of the funds will be for 3 research categories of personal protective equipment, disinfection and sterilization technology, and design features of physical spaces. And then 25% of the funds would be limited to researching public policy and planning. No more than 8% of the tax revenue in any year will be spent on administrative expenses. Here are the pros and cons of Initiated Ordinance 300.
Those in favor of Initiated Ordinance 300 say the next pandemic shouldn't catch us off guard. It's important to build a long-term plan to prevent learning gaps due to pandemics. For only 15 cents on a $10 recreational marijuana purchase, medical marijuana is exempt, we will be able to innovate better masks and other personal protective equipment for healthcare workers and the general public, and improve building ventilation and disinfectant systems for everyone's safety. Preparation will help Denver to take charge of preparation for schools, hospitals, restaurants, and small businesses.
Those opposed to Initiated Ordinance 300 say CU Denver did not ask for this, yet the sponsors made it the beneficiary. They say right now marijuana sales are the commodity of choice for those who wish to gain more money for more government spending by instituting another sin tax. In fact, marijuana is overtaxed at various levels, and this initiative just adds fuel to the fire. The unintended consequences of this tax and others like it are to drive more marijuana sales underground into the black market arena. Also, since CU Denver City Center did not ask for or want these funds, the stated goals of the initiatives are in danger of never being achieved, and the funds diverted to other purposes. This is not unheard of in the world of government.
Next up is Initiated Ordinance 301. It is a citizen-initiated proposal and asks if the city should adopt a measure prohibiting certain parks and open spaces issues without the approval of voters in a regularly scheduled municipal or special election. These issues include any commercial or residential development on land designated as a city park and land protected by a city-owned conservation easement, except where consistent with park purposes, conservation easement purposes, or for cultural facilities, and any partial or complete cancellation of a city-owned conservation easement unless for the purpose of creating a new park. Here are the pros and cons of Initiated Ordinance 301.
Those in favor of 301 say the ordinance will help protect our parks and open spaces from unchecked development. The Park Hill Golf Course land is currently protected by a city-owned conservation easement, which Denver voters approved and paid for specifically to protect this green space from development. Now, proponents say a developer wants to eliminate the easement and turn this space into concrete. As Denver grows, we need to preserve and protect our green spaces as they provide health and environmental benefits to the surrounding community. Under this conservation easement, the Park Hill green space can be used for recreational activities. This won't happen if the developer is allowed to have the conservation easement removed. Denver's past visionary leaders committed to create a city within a park. As increased pollution and climate change affect our health and well-being, that vision is in jeopardy. Denver is growing, and neighborhoods are becoming denser, with multifamily housing and commercial buildings. People need respite from noise, pollution, and scorching streets, which makes protecting our parks and green space more important. Proponents say this is the green versus concrete ballot initiative. The urban forest is vital infrastructure to our city's health. Trees and vegetation in our parks help clean the air we breathe and provide shade that decreases the cooling load on our energy infrastructure.
Opponents of Initiative 301 say this confusing and misleading initiative is not about park space and in fact only applies to the privately owned Park Hill Golf Course. This is an attempt to allow the city to veto the will of the diverse and historically disenfranchised residents surrounding the Northeast Park Hill community. If this initiative passes, Northeast Park Hill's voice will be silenced and the land will remain a golf course, which is all the current easement allows, preventing the land from serving the community with a public park, affordable housing, or a needed grocery store. While there are important public health benefits to open space, there are equally critical health benefits to affordable housing, access to fresh foods, and job opportunities, all of which local residents have said they want for this land in a recent city survey. And opponents say this is a direct attempt to make a local issue into a citywide issue at the expense of a diverse community. The passage of this initiative would set a dangerous precedent against local control for future planning processes by allowing a citywide vote to determine what happens in a local community.
Initiated Ordinance 302 asks if the city should adopt a measure to do the following: amend the definition of conservation easement to apply only to conservation easements which have been reviewed and approved by the Division of Conservation, and for which an income tax credit certificate has been issued by the Division of Conservation. Require voter approval before the city allows residential or commercial construction on city park land or city property protected by a conservation easement, with exceptions for limited construction related to recreational use, cultural facilities, or construction consistent with the terms of a conservation easement, and require voter approval to extinguish a city-owned conservation easement. Now here are the pros and cons of Initiated Ordinance 302.
Those in favor of Ordinance 302 say there is a defunct golf course in the diverse Northeast Park Hill neighborhood. Local residents and community leaders are working through a process with the city to decide what their neighborhood wants and needs for this property. This initiative ensures the local neighborhood has the power to determine the future of this property. This community lacks affordable housing, a grocery store, and open space, and they should have a say over what happens in the neighborhood and how to use this property to better the community. The initiative protects the voice of Northeast Park Hill by more clearly defining a conservation easement in Denver law. This measure doesn't change state conservation easement laws or reduce land protections. Proponents say a different measure on the ballot this year would give voters across the city veto power over what local residents want for their community on this property. We don't let Cherry Creek residents decide what Five Points needs, and vice versa, and city voters should not have veto power over this neighborhood. If this measure does not pass, it sets a dangerous precedent for citywide voters to have veto power over any local neighborhood issue. Our initiative protects local choices and local voices.
Opponents of Ordinance 302 say this ballot initiative is financed and supported by a real estate developer who wants to tear up an existing perpetual conservation easement so that they can build mixed-use development on one of the last large pieces of open space that could be acquired for a city park, the 155-acre Park Hill Golf Course land. This land is currently protected from their planned development by a city-owned conservation easement. The developer, Westside Investment Partners, has launched this misleading and deliberately confusing ballot initiative for the sole purpose of undermining the citizen-initiated Ordinance 301. Opponents also say the developer's proposed measure dishonestly appears to be a Protect Parks measure by copying the exact language of proposed Initiative 301. But it deceptively includes a poison pill that redefines the term conservation easement under Denver law to exclude conservation easements purchased by city taxpayers for cash with no state income tax credits involved. This sleight of hand would eliminate the voter protections of 301 for this land and facilitate their plan to pave over this pristine, green, open space for their sole profit. This is a citywide issue, and passage of this measure would be a disaster for the environment and Denver citizens, and a multi-million-dollar gift to this real estate developer.
Ordinance 303 asks if the city should adopt an ordinance requiring the city and county of Denver to enforce unauthorized camping and provide a process for private enforcement if the city fails to enforce unauthorized camping. It would allow the city to establish up to 4 authorized camping locations on public property where the city must provide running water, restroom facilities, and lighting, and fund such camping locations with city revenues to support the city's homeless population. Here are the pros and cons of Ordinance 303.
Proponents of initiated Ordinance 303 say Denver is facing a continuing public health and safety emergency, with homeless campsites being set up across the city in spaces that lack the facilities to humanely accommodate overnight stays. They say tent cities with no services are not beneficial or respectful to anyone. The Homelessness, Compassion, and Safety Initiative requires the city, at a minimum, to provide running water, bathrooms, and safety lighting at all encampments it sponsors. The initiative allows for the filing of complaints with the city and then requires the city to take enforcement action within 72 hours. The measure does not alter the current ban on camping in unauthorized areas. It empowers citizens and property owners to enforce this section of the law in court if the city will not. To ensure that the city can effectively and thoroughly manage its responsibilities, this measure caps the number of city-sponsored encampments at 4.
Opponents of Initiative 303 say the proposal was led and the signatures were all paid for by a dark money group, so we will never know who is really behind this initiative due to their lack of transparency. Initiative 303 would require the City of Denver to fund and establish up to 4 authorized neighborhood homeless camps. The measure provides no details or guidance about where these sites would be located or how the locations would be determined. Additionally, Initiative 303 would require the city to clean and close unauthorized homeless encampments within 72 hours of receiving a complaint, in direct violation of a federal court order that requires 7 days' notice for the removal of such camps. If the city does not address an encampment within 72 hours, a civil action could be led against the city in court. Initiative 303 would likely cost tens of millions of dollars to implement, and millions would have to be spent establishing and operating the 4 authorized neighborhood homeless camps.
Finally on the ballot is Initiated Ordinance 304, which asks if the city should adopt an ordinance reducing the total sales and use tax levied in the city and county of Denver from 4.81% to 4.5%, This would set the aggregate total sales and use tax levied at 4.5%, requiring that if at any election the people of the City and County of Denver pass a special sales and use tax that exceeds the aggregate 4.5%, the city must adjust the existing tax levy to comply with the 4.5% aggregate. Now here are the pros and cons of Initiated Ordinance 304.
Those in favor of Ordinance 304 say, as with any regressive tax, the sales tax is a tax on poverty. The higher the tax rate, the more the tax hurts the lowest earners. According to the Colorado Department of Revenue, Colorado residents making under $15,000 per year paid 6.5 times more in local sales taxes than those making over $200,000 per year relative to income. This measure would cap the cumulative Denver sales tax rate at 4.5%, limiting how heavily the city can rely on this regressive tax on the poor to fund city services. They say, we need to fund essential city services, but we do not need to do so on the backs of the city's poorest residents. According to the 2021 Denver Mayor's budget, in addition to the 32% increase in the sales tax rate over the last 3 years, the city plans to increase sales tax revenue by another $14 million per year starting in 2021. Using a legal loophole created by a 2018 United States Supreme Court ruling, the city will increase sales tax revenues without voter consent. This ballot measure gives voters the opportunity to help offset that increase and reduce taxes on Denver's poorest residents. If adopted, this measure would decrease the Denver sales tax rate by just 6.5% from the current rate, a very small decrease relative to the 32% increase since 2018. Over the same period during which Denver sales tax has risen 32%, the state sales tax has not changed.
Opponents to Ordinance 304 say this measure would require the immediate cut of up to $80 million from the city's budget, threatening critical services and vital employee positions. The $80 million reduction would not be just for 1 year. It would ratchet down the city's budget for years to come, likely forcing the city to look for other revenue sources, such as increased fees or property taxes, to restore and maintain services. To understand the significant impact to Denver and its residents, $80 million represents the equivalent of the annual budgets for the entire Denver Public Library System, Planning Department, and the Office of the Independent Monitor. Opponents also say the initiative's most draconian provision is a reduction of the city's sales tax rate from 4.81% to 4.5%. That reduction would defund essential services at a time when Denver is doing everything possible to recover from the pandemic. To balance its budget, the city would have to reduce funding for dedicated programs for homelessness, mental health, preschool, and college affordability that are funded through sales tax dollars previously approved by Denver voters. Additionally, Initiated Ordinance 304 was placed on this ballot without consulting with the mayor, city council, community, and business leaders, or any other stakeholders working to strengthen Denver and serve our residents and neighborhoods.
Those are the issues you'll be voting on this fall. Again, you can refer to your state and city ballot guides for more information. All Denver households with registered voters will get these guides. And you can get information on these issues from the League of Women Voters of Denver and of Colorado. Go to lwvdenver.org and lwvcolorado.org. Before we get to the candidates, we'll take a break. Also on this November's ballot are candidates running for positions on the Denver Public Schools Board. In ballot order, here are the candidates and where you can get more information about them.
All Denver voters will choose a director at large. The candidates are Marla F. Benavides, marlaforschoolboard.org, Scott Esserman, essermanfordenverkids.com, Jane Shirley, janeshirley.com, Nikki Yolick, nikkifordenverkids.com, Vernon Jones Jr., jonesfordenver.com.
For Denver Public Schools Director for District 2 in the southwest part of town, voters will choose between Zakatil Sochi Gaitan, guyton4dps.com, and Carolina Villagrana, Carolina for SouthwestDenverKids.com.
For Denver Public Schools Director for District 3 in East Central Denver, the choices are Carrie A. Olson, CarrieAOlson.com, Mike DeGeer, DrMike4DPS.com.
And for Denver Public Schools Director District 4 in the northeast part of town, voters will choose between Michelle Quattlebaum, Michelle for DenverKids.org, Jean Fashaw, Jean for DPS.org, Jose Silva, Dr. Silva for DenverKids.com.
Denver has been a pioneer in conducting safe and secure mail-in elections and has successfully conducted mail-in elections for years. Denver's municipal ballot information booklet and inserts sent along with your ballot have all the information you need to make sure your vote counts. You can also visit denvervotes.org. If you haven't registered or if you need to verify or change your information, go to govotecolorado.gov. You can return your ballot one of three ways: by mail, drop it off at one of the drop boxes, or bring it to a voter service and polling center. You can text VSPC to 56003 for the nearest ballot drop-off. You can also track your ballot through the entire process with Ballot Trace. Sign up at ballottrace.org or text TRACE to 56003. If you need a new ballot or didn't get a ballot, visit denvervotes.org/voterinfo to get one, or call 311 or 720-913-8683. Remember, in order for your vote to count, be sure your ballot arrives by 7 p.m. on Election Day, Tuesday, November 2nd. Thanks for watching, and be sure to exercise your right as an American and vote.